This is my own simplified view of drug development in the United States. And I have it split into 4 steps, the first of which is drug discovery. So this is when we identify different compounds or with different chemical structures. Maybe we identify those from the environment, or maybe we synthesize those in a laboratory. But this is the discovery phase of drug development. Then we have the next phase, which I call development, and this has to do with a lot of laboratory studies and animal testing that goes on prior to ever giving a drug to a human. So we know a lot of information from the development phase before we even consider giving a drug to a human volunteer. The next step is the application phase, and this is where we find the 3 clinical phases of drug development, where human volunteers do actually receive the drug. And then finally we have an implementation phase. So a lot of people think that once a drug is approved for use, that that's sort of the end of the development process. But in fact, the development continues long after the drug has been approved. These next few slides are some images from the FDA website where the FDA describes to us the drug review process in the United States. So it all begins with the submission of an application to FDA to begin human testing. And this particular application is called an Investigational New Drug Application, or an IND. Prior to this, of course, we've had the discovery phase, we've had the development phase with a lot of the laboratory work and a lot of the animal testing, but now we're wanting to study this drug in human subjects. After submission of this IND, there are 2 levels of review. The first level happens at the national level, where FDA looks at all of the preclinical work, all of the laboratory work, years and years of data that led to the submission of this IND. The other level of review happens locally by these entities called Institutional Review Boards, or IRBs. These IRBs are regulated by FDA, but they are located at the local level. So these are in towns, cities, maybe health systems, and they have a slightly different focus. They are looking at the specific human studies that are being proposed, and they're evaluating the study design, they're evaluating the safety, they're evaluating the number of patients that the investigator wants to have in the study. So they look at all of these things and they make a determination as to whether or not the potential benefits outweigh the risks, and then they tell the investigator if he or she can proceed with those human studies. Only after the FDA has given the go-ahead and the IRB have said it's okay to begin human testing can this human testing commence. When the human testing begins, we have 3 clinical phases of human testing, and they're labeled as 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 are very small studies, and they often involve as few as 10 to 20 people. And I say people because these are healthy human volunteers. They are not individuals who have the medical condition of interest. So they are not patients, but they are rather healthy volunteers. And this is the first time that this particular drug product will be given to a human subject. These studies are really meant to determine the safety and tolerability of the new drug product, because recall, up to this point, no human has ever received this drug product. These studies also seek to determine the pharmacokinetics of the drug product. So the word pharmacokinetics, I know it's a big word, but just what it has to do with is measuring drug levels in the body, and it has to do with determining how the drug is eliminated from the body. And so there is a whole bunch of studies that need to be done to determine how the human body handles this new drug that is being given to the healthy volunteer. If everything goes well in the phase 1 studies, then the investigators proceed to the phase 2 studies. And in the phase 2 studies, this is the first time that they're really doing proof of concept studies. And what I mean by this is that there is a comparator. So the investigator is giving possibly half of the patients the new active drug and half of the patients an inactive drug or some drug that's already been on the market and is known to work. And the whole idea in phase 2 is to determine if this new drug product works better than an inactive product, or if you have an active comparator, that it works at least as well as the active comparator. This is also the set of studies where we determine the dose that will eventually be given in the larger studies. So these patients receive a variety of doses, and the idea is to figure out which of those doses is associated with the best effect and is also associated with the fewest side effects. And then finally, safety is always evaluated in these studies, whether we're in phase 1, 2, 3, or even after that. So safety is also a big component of these phase 2 studies. And in the phase 2 studies, these are still relatively small, and we're talking about studies that involve maybe 100 or maybe even up to 500 patients. If all goes well in phases 1 and 2 of drug development, then the product is studied in phase 3. And this is where we start to get really excited, because in phase 3, this is where the new drug is given to thousands of patients who have the disease. And again, it's compared to either an inactive drug known as placebo or to a comparator that we know works. So it's given to thousands of patients, and we're going to determine in a very large scale if the drug works and also if it's safe for those patients who receive it. One big distinction with the phase 3 studies is that they often occur in multiple centers around the country and around the world. So these are not limited to the United States only. And the data from all of these centers around the world are pulled together and evaluated by the FDA, and this serves as the primary data that's used to determine if a drug will in fact be approved for sale in the United States. Another big distinction with the phase 3 studies is, as you can imagine, since we're talking about multiple centers around the globe, the drug is not being given by investigators or researchers anymore, but rather it's being given by practicing clinicians or healthcare providers. And so this also is a very important test, is to see if the drug, when given by healthcare providers in natural healthcare settings, if the drug can work in that environment, then that is additional evidence to the FDA that that drug is in fact safe and effective. I don't want to give you the impression that a company pursues all of these studies alone, but in fact, they are in constant communication with the FDA throughout the entire drug development process. And so during these phases of clinical testing, they're working with the FDA, in some cases, to design the studies so that they will provide the evidence that's needed for approval. In other cases, they are reporting preliminary findings to the FDA, and the FDA monitors that very closely. If they see a problem, they can halt the study before the planned completion date in order to provide safety to those patients who have not yet undergone the clinical trial. Or if things are going well, then the FDA can terminate a trial early for that reason too, because the drug is so effective and it has exceeded the expectations by so much that we need to halt the clinical trial, get approval of the drug, and start making it available to the people who need it. The application that's filed at the end of all of this clinical testing is called the New Drug Application, or the NDA. When that NDA goes to the FDA agency, the agency has several individuals who look at all of that information. And these people have very diverse backgrounds. Some are clinicians, some are scientists, some are statisticians, And if the FDA feels that this is a special circumstance and they don't have the expertise that they need available at the FDA facility, then they will actually go out and find experts throughout the country or throughout the world to review these data and give them some recommendation as to whether or not that drug appears to be safe and effective. The FDA also goes out and inspects the facilities where the drug is going to be made. And so they make certain that those facilities are adhering to good manufacturing practices and that they are making the drug in a robust, standardized way, and that the facilities are operating as they should be. The FDA also reviews all of the materials that are going to be distributed to healthcare professionals and patients when someone receives a drug. So this is called the product labeling or the package labeling, or sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the package insert. But this is a set of information, usually it's 7 to 8 pages, that are distributed with the product when it goes through the chain of distribution to the pharmacies, to the healthcare providers, and ultimately to the patient. And so this labeling contains a lot of information about the clinical studies that were done, about the safety concerns, if there are any, about the appropriate doses that should be used, and a whole bunch of other information that really is needed by the healthcare professional and the individual patient to make a determination as to whether or not that particular drug product is the right choice for them. Finally, the FDA makes a determination as to whether or not to approve the new drug. If they do approve the new drug, it's often a cause of great celebration at the manufacturer. If they don't approve the drug, they may ask for additional studies from the manufacturer. Or they may just decide that there is sufficient evidence to conclude that the drug is ineffective or that it is unsafe. And in those cases, it may never be approved for use in the United States.